So lumber prices have gone down in the last week or two. So does this mean that real estate development, building, and contracting is back to normal and the prices will be more palatable? Let's take a look. As you can see from the chart, lumber prices have gone down back under the $1,000 mark, and that's a measurement of dollars per thousand board feet. It was up in the $1,400 range. At one point it hit $1,700, $1,600 back in 2021. As you can see, the level that it's at today, which is mid-April 2022, is same as the price point that existed at the end of 21. So that's a few months ago. But as you also notice, it had dropped down to that level the beginning of the year, the end of January. So this drop may represent some savings for clients, contractors, builders that are looking at projects in the next month or two. But as you can see the volatility, it may not be a permanent resting place for the price. Even if it is, the lumber cost component for a large commercial project may not be enough of a motivating factor to really change how a client or a general contractor is going to look at a project. And let's take a look at what that might mean. So if you have a lumber project, let's say that's a $35,000 or $40,000 build package, and your lumber quote from your supplier, let's call it $40,000. Well, if the price point goes down from, let's say, $1,200 to $900, that's going to reduce your lumber cost maybe down to $30,000 instead of $40,000. Now, $10,000 is real money. It's not anything to sneeze at. But that same job might now have an increased labor cost of $7,000 or $8,000. So it's going to be an even wash. In addition, when you're pricing out that job today, you're going to look at this chart and say, well, if I get my lumber quote today and I get my permits, I get my approvals from the client, I have my site work done, and I go to buy the lumber package and it's back up to $1,200, that's going to be my price point. So the builder or contractor or even homeowner client has two options. Either you buy your lumber today and store it on site, or you price your job at an average from the last 6 months. And if you're going to do that, you're going to be at the $1,100 to $1,200 point anyways. So the lumber price, spot price today, is lower than a few weeks ago, but it's still higher than it was 3 months ago. It's about the same as it was 2 months ago. It's great to see lumber down at this level, but a deeper dive will show us that it may not be all it's cracked up to be. Part of the reason for the lumber price reduction is that there are still supply chain bottlenecks, meaning that people can't get their lumber. So when you don't have that high volume of transaction points, you're going to have lower demand and the price will go down. People aren't ordering more because they already are behind on what they've ordered before. So if you have a lumber package that you've ordered that hasn't arrived yet, you may not be able to purchase the next batch that you need, and that could affect the price. This drop under 1,000 may be an artificial demand reduction because of the supply chain holding back the availability for lumber yards, supply houses, even DIYers. You're finding people going into the major big box lumber stores, the blue one and the orange one, and seeing the lumber prices higher and maybe buying less than what they would have before, maybe not having the availability of certain items. We're already seeing in some local supply houses certain types of goods aren't as easily available. Maybe 2x10 pressure treated are out of stock. Maybe certain lengths of goods, maybe 16-foot goods, are out of stock. When those items are not available, the other part of the package might not be purchased. If you need 2x10 16-foot goods and you can't get those, the rest of your standard lumber, 2x4s or 2x6s or other materials, you might not buy because you can't do that project now anyways. You might have to wait for those items. At the same time, the other cost components of a major construction project, a remodel, an addition, even a new home construction, are dependent upon the labor availability. And right now, even though the economy is starting to pop and there's fewer lockdowns and more activity in the building realm, in addition to the time of year, now that you're into April, most of the country can now do more construction because you're out of the doldrums of winter. Even with all that, the building pace may be less robust because of the availability of labor. And a lot of that comes as a self-fulfilling prophecy. As you do more projects, the labor gets spread thinner. As more people are finding careers outside of their previous construction workforce, there's also less availability for the contract company. And also beware with lumber prices, seeing that drop below 1,000, that is counterintuitive or contraindicating for the overall inflationary price points. Gas is still up, food is still up, vehicles are still up, prices of homes are still higher. The fact that lumber has blipped down doesn't necessarily mean it's a permanent state of the price point. In fact, it's probably a little bit of a mini micro adjustment to the price because of inflation in other areas. People are making adjustments. And what will happen in the long run is if the volume of lumber purchasing is reduced because of you can't build houses fast enough, there's no labor, or the permitting process is slowed down, the lumber producers might actually have to raise prices to cover their fixed expenses, cover their basic overhead. If you're producing, 1 million board feet a month, and you can divide your fixed expenses, your equipment, your mortgage, your property carrying costs, your payroll over that volume, you can sell at a certain price. If your volume now goes down to 600,000 board feet a month as a producer or a wholesaler, whatever your role in the supply chain is, you might have to actually raise your margin to cover those fixed expenses. In addition, a hidden or invisible problem with the development process is permitting. There are serious budget and workforce constraints on the public sector permitting industry, meaning that the permit offices, the land use offices, the inspectors, all of the municipal government agencies that go into a building project, whether it's the initial zoning review, the plans analysis, the permitting approvals, the inspections, the final COs, all those require government employees to process that. We're seeing in many jurisdictions, many of the counties around the country, that the staffing is at a very low level and the permits are getting backed up to where instead of a 1 or 2 or 3 week turnaround, it's 2 or 3 months turnaround in places where it used to be quick. Some parts of the country, California is a good example. The permitting process, sometimes you have to plan for a year to get your permit. But in other parts of the country, like Texas, you can get permits turned around in many counties in a couple weeks. With the workforce reduction, even some residual lockdown or corona effects holding back the procedures in a government office. Now if you have to wait 3 months for a permit approval, you can't order your lumber package. So you have to factor in to your price whatever price point you can imagine will be in place 3 months from now. Look, before 2019, you could pretty much predict what the lumber was going to cost in 3 months. There was some volatility, but it was very minor, the change in price. And you could factor that in to almost any bid project. With the volatility that has existed now, you almost have to figure worst case scenario for your lumber package, because even if your permit is a month away, a month and a half away, well, you can see from that chart what can happen in a month. It can go from 900 to 1200 back down to 900 and anywhere in between. It's like the roulette wheel. You don't know where it's going to stop when it's time to order your lumber package. And you also have to factor in a little bit more time, because at the moment that your permit's approved, now you have to put together your workforce to start working on your project. And juggling that workforce with other jobs, maybe they're working for other companies, is also less predictable. There are fewer people in the workforce to begin with. So this lumber price reduction is a good thing if you can catch it at the right time. But the volatility in that range, that trading range of lumber, dollars per 1,000 board feet, is so wide that as a builder, you either have to buy the lumber now and store it, or you have to plan on the worst possible scenario for that price, because you might not be buying it for a month or 2 or 3 in some cases. Now, what about storing lumber? This is an interesting arbitrage type strategy, and some homeowners, some builders are looking at this strategy saying, look, let's buy the package or most of it while the price is low. There may be some things you still have to buy, filler items or upgrade items at a later date. But if you can buy it now when you see the price point down at 900 or 800 or under 1,000, maybe that's a strategy to save you 10,000, 15,000 on the lumber cost. But it also introduces a couple other factors. First, you have to have a place to store it. And if your job site has a location where you can put that kind of lumber, that's great. But once you've decided to do that and stored it, you have a couple risk factors. Now you have pilferage or shrinkage. That lumber can disappear because it's so valuable. If it's sitting out there for weeks and months at a time, someone's going to notice. And you may have theft or people trying to find ways to get some of your lumber package. In addition, you also have the risk of damage. A truck backs into it, forklift backs into it, maybe it gets ruined because of weather, maybe the bottom layer is too close to the mud and that's unusable. The last thing is to look at insurance. Most insurance coverage for commercial construction or your homeowner policy has coverage for materials, but there's certain limits. It has to be within a certain distance of the job site, sometimes 50 feet, 100 feet. And if your lumber storage is technically outside of the coverage zone, you might not have insurance. So if there's a fire, if there's a tree that falls on it, you may not have coverage. So if you are going to decide to store materials because of price arbitrage, you're trying to get in on a lower price, make sure that you're reviewing your commercial policy for your insurance to make sure you still have coverage. And make sure you check your inventory when the materials are delivered. A lot of times on an active job site, you're going to check your stick count to make sure that it's correct. If it's stored for a long period of time, you might not have the urgency to check it right then, but make sure that your lumber volume is verified that it's correct. And then tarp it up, tie it down, make sure that it's protected. Ideally, it wouldn't be visible from the public, from the road. But that's just one strategy. There's risk involved, but if you're talking a 20 or 30% reduction in cost, it might be worth looking into. There's also the risk that the price when you go to buy it could be less. If you buy it at $950, in 3 months, it could be down to $880, and you could have purchased it cheaper. It's unlikely. If you're buying it at the lower point of the trading range from the last few months, it's unlikely, but you could go all through that trouble of storage and securing and insurance and find out that it wasn't that much cheaper. And at the same time, when the lumber is going to be used, there may be changes in your design or changes in what the permit requires. So you may have to buy some other lumber anyways, and adding that small package could be an expense. So you have to look at the trade-offs for purchasing ahead, and it may not be practical. It's not a very common thing to store it that long, and it may not be practical. Just remember, inflation overall in the marketplace is still going up. So if you see this drop in lumber, it may not be a permanent thing. And for a builder doing new home construction for a building company, or if you're a general contractor doing jobs for private residences, this may not be something you can count on for a future purchase. If you're a home owner that's doing a DIY project or having a builder do a small project, this may be an opportunity to buy the lumber if you don't need a long lead time on permitting, or if it's a non-permitted project. Maybe it's a deck or some type of enclosure that doesn't need permits, where you can just buy on the spot price at drop of a hat. But look at those opportunities to maybe save some money. And then those smaller projects, the savings might not be that great. Instead of $3,000, it might be $2,200 for lumber. So you can save $800, and that might be extra money you can put into other things in the project, or make a project doable, where if you have a budget of $2,000 and the lumber price puts you up over that, now's the time to go ahead and do that addition, because the overall real estate market is still on fire. Additions and upgrades to homes are more likely going to pay off in the future, and that doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon.